Chapter 11, Section 5, Immigration from Asia. Although immigration after the Civil War was mainly from Europe, many immigrants also arrived each year from Asia. They made important contributions to the country. They also provoked strong reactions from the nativists. Chinese immigrants see Gold Mountain. You have read about the thousands of Chinese railroad workers who laid track through the Sierra Nevada for the Central Pacific Railroad. Thousands more joined the swarms of prospectors who scoured the West for gold. In fact, the Chinese referred to California, the site of the first gold rush, as Gold Mountain. The vast majority of Chinese immigrants were men. They streamed into California, mainly through the port of San Francisco. Most expected to work hard and return home rich. However, they usually ended up staying in the United States. Besides finding employment in mining and railroad construction, Chinese immigrants worked in agriculture. Some had first come to Hawaii as contract laborers to work on sugar plantations. There they earned a reputation as reliable, steady workers. Farm owners on the mainland saw the value of their labor and began bringing the Chinese to California. The Chinese were willing to do the stoop labor in the fields that many white laborers refused to do. By the early 1880s, most harvest workers in the state were Chinese. Many businesses hired the Chinese because they were willing to work for less money. This allowed owners to reduce production costs even further by paying white workers less. As a result, friction developed between working-class whites and Chinese immigrants. The Exclusion Act, shutting the doors on the Chinese. During the 1870s, a depression and drought knocked the wind out of California's economy. Seeking a scapegoat, many Californians blamed Chinese workers for their economic woes. The Chinese made an easy target. They looked different from white Americans, and their language, religion, and other cultural traits were also very different. As a result, innocent Chinese became victims of mob violence, during which many were driven out of their homes and even murdered. Anti-Chinese nativism had a strong racial component. The Chinese were seen as inferior people who could never be Americanized. Economist Henry George reflected this racist point of view in characterizing the Chinese as utter heathens, treacherous, sensual, cowardly, and cruel. Nativists demanded that Chinese immigration be curtailed or reduced. Their outcries led to the passage of the Chinese Exclusion Act in 1882. This law prohibited the immigration of Chinese laborers, skilled or unskilled, for a period of 10 years. It also prevented Chinese already in the country from becoming citizens. For the first time, the United States had restricted immigration based solely on nationality or race. The Chinese Exclusion Act still allowed a few Chinese to enter the country, including merchants, diplomats, teachers, students, and relatives of existing citizens. But the act did what it was supposed to do. Immigration from China fell from a high of nearly 40,000 people in 1882 to just 279 2 years later. Angel Island, the Ellis Island of the West. Although the Chinese Exclusion Act was highly effective, some Chinese managed to evade the law by using forged documents and false names. In response, federal officials developed tougher procedures for processing Asian immigrants. They also decided to replace the old Immigrant Processing Center in San Francisco with a more secure facility located on Angel Island in San Francisco Bay. Completed in 1910, the Angel Island Immigration Station became known as the Ellis Island of the West. It was designed to enforce the Exclusion Act by keeping new Chinese arrivals isolated from friends and relatives on the mainland and preventing them from escaping. At Angel Island, immigrants underwent a thorough physical exam. Then they faced an intense legal interview, more involved and detailed than the Ellis Island version. Officials hoped to exclude Chinese who falsely claimed to be related to American citizens. Interviewers asked applicants specific questions about their home village, their family, and the house they lived in. They also questioned witnesses. The process could take days. Those who failed the interviews could enter on appeal, but additional evidence took time to gather. Applicants were often detained for weeks, months, or even years. Chinese detained at Angel Island stayed locked in wooden barracks. These living quarters were crowded and unsanitary. Detainees felt miserable and frustrated to be stopped so close to their goal. From their barracks, they could see across the water to the mainland. Some carved poems into the walls to express their feelings. One Chinese detainee wrote, "Imprisoned in the wooden building day after day, my freedom withheld, how can I bear to talk about it?" From Ronald Takaki, Strangers from a Different Shore, 1989. Many Chinese never made it to the mainland. About 10% were put on ship in the medical exam or legal interview. Other Asian groups immigrate to the United States. The Chinese Exclusion Act created a shortage of farm laborers. Large-scale farmers looked to Japan and later to Korea and the Philippines for workers. These other Asian immigrants had experiences similar to those of the Chinese. Many first immigrated to work on Hawaiian sugar plantations. They came to the United States through Angel Island to work in orchards and vineyards and on farms in California, Oregon, and Washington. Some worked for railroads and other industries. A number of Japanese immigrants leased farmland and had great success growing fruits and vegetables. They formed ethnic neighborhoods that provided for their economic and social needs. Koreans had less success. Only a small number moved from Hawaii to the mainland in the early 1900s, and they led more isolated lives. Immigrants from the Philippines migrated up and down the west coast, taking part in fruit and vegetable harvests. In the winter, many of these Filipinos worked in hotels and restaurants. Despite their contributions, all Asian immigrants faced prejudice, hostility, and discrimination. In 1906, anti-Asian feelings in San Francisco caused the city to segregate Asian children in separate schools from whites. When Japan's government protested, President Theodore Roosevelt got involved. Hoping to avoid offending East Asia's most powerful nation, the president persuaded San Francisco School Board to repeal the segregation order. In return, he got a pledge from Japan to discuss issues related to immigration. In 1907 and 1908, the American and Japanese governments carried out secret negotiations through a series of notes. These notes became known as the Gentleman's Agreement. In the end, Japanese officials agreed not to allow laborers to immigrate to the United States. They did, however, insist that wives, children, and parents of Japanese in the United States be allowed to immigrate.